the way you entered into the meeting, you have 3 people in the waiting room.
Okay. So we're now on record. I will just reiterate that while we were getting the recording going, I called our December 9th meeting of the Village Zoning Board of Appeals meeting to order. We saluted the flag. Before I go to the next item of business, which is the minutes, I just want to note in passing that Bruce Kaplan, a longtime resident of Sagaponic, very active in local affairs, and is on the board of the Bridgehampton Library, currently residing in West Palm, Florida, has died. I note this in part because Mr. Kaplan was a resident of one of the houses immediately to the north of one of the applicants here, the 110 Sand Dune. I mentioned that he was involved in local affairs and of course did not make an appearance here, but I just thought I would mention it in passing. All right, so the next formal item is reading the minute, the resolution adopting the minutes. I've just polled the board. We got a mass of materials in the last week, basically from the applicant, the opponents to the application, and just today, even some additional reading material about the costs. And I, for one, haven't had an adequate opportunity to review the minutes of the November meeting. So instead of asking for a resolution adopting those minutes, I'm going to ask for a resolution to defer the adoption of the November 14th meeting minutes until the January meeting. Second, all in favor? Aye. Thank you. Okay, we have a full board sitting today with 4 regular members and David McMillan, our alternate member, in the absence of Richard Thayer. I don't know whether Mr. Thayer and or Mr. Thompson are monitoring, but under our rules, if you are participating in the meeting, even though we allow hybrid meetings and allow members of the board to monitor by Zoom, they can't actively participate and vote, but we are a full board. Okay, we had 2 items of business on the agenda today. I'm going to reverse the order that they are set forth on the agenda because one of them is merely the rendering of the decision. So the first item we're addressing is 1 Sweet Potato LLC pertaining to 1 Potato Road, application 3 of 2022 for a number of variances, including probably most materially the raising of the house to be in compliance with FEMA regulations, violations of the pyramid, and the height, as well as certain setbacks. This was extensively presented at the last meeting. There are some distinguishing characteristics here. This raising of the house is mandated by FEMA due to the extent of the renovation. It's not voluntary compliance, but it's required. It is a major alteration. The setback requirements that are being requested for variances are consistent with the setbacks in the neighborhood on that Potato Road, as is the parking variance, because the nature of the properties there where everyone parks in the front yard along the private road, the access road. The most material variance that they're asking for was a height variance. And even though at the peak of the consistently sloped roof at the very southerly end at the ocean is fairly substantial, and we on the board have all expressed our concern about height exceedances, particularly in the ocean area. It's pointed out that only a very small percentage of that roof reaches that level. Most of the roof is no higher than previously granted variances for height exceedances, variances in the nature of 1.3 I think, or 1.5 So with those comments, and if members of the board have had the opportunity to review the proposed decision drafted by Chris Bianco, our counsel, I would like to have a resolution adopting the decision which grants the variances that have been requested strictly in accordance with the terms of that written decision, which will be entered into the record. Anyone have any comments about the decision or? Yes.
We're going to look at, even though they're itemized and numbered 1 through 9, and we're going to take them as a mass.
Well, you can comment on, it is proposed here. There are 9 requested variances. I merely summarized some of them. There are other ones, the side lot, the generator and all, but we have a draft of a proposed decision which would grant all of the variances that were requested on the terms and conditions strictly as set forth in the decision, not in my words. But if there are comments or things that we should be discussing about either modifying or eliminating any of those variances, this is the time to air that.
Well, I guess what I would like to say about this decision is that it's interesting to me because we're talking about the safety and moving these houses out of harm's way. And yet some of the relief is actually to place structures closer to crest of dune, things like that. And so I just think that there's sort of an underlying inconsistency in what's actually trying to be achieved by raising houses on the beach, reconfiguring.
Is this closer to the crest of dune in the?
The crest of dune 109, and then there.
One of them,
But the existing crest of dune for the existing structure, I thought we were mitigating to some extent, either being the same as or less than the existing.
there's a rebuilt rear terrace, which I believe is the same, and then there is an exterior staircase that they're building, but that's also because they're moving up, and so they need the staircase on the side to for access.
That's a side lot. That's not.
That was also crest of
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I'm not
I
talking
do.
about the substance of a decision so much as the substance of the act.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I think what Chris has just indicated was that the increase in the crest of dune exceedance is, number one, relatively minor. Number two, it's on the side of the house, it's a side lot, and that is in effect necessitated by the increase in the elevation in order to have the appropriate slope for the stairway.
Yeah.
So it's not just a voluntary.
No, it's part of the overall design, but what I'm saying is that there's 2 things taking place. On one hand, we're being, in these applications in general, and that's also sort of emphasized here, where they're being asked for relief to move their house out of harm's way. At the same time, there's decisions being made that are actually placing parts of their structure closer to the ocean.
Well,
Because, I mean, our variances aren't there. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, and am I not making this point
Yeah,
about?
the portion of the side lot, the stairway, which is on the side of the house, which is closer to the dune crest than it was before, is still further north of the dune crest than the southerlymost portion of the structure. So we're not extending any portion of the structure in its entirety closer to the dune.
That I understand, but what I'm trying is,
Yeah.
we're talking about a house with
Right.
many moving parts.
Right.
And we have a crest of dune setback that's, say, here, right?
Right.
There's the elevation. And so then any piece of that house, or any of these houses, that we're actually giving, at the same time, they're asking us to lift them higher to get them out of harm's way. There are all sorts of elements to these houses that they are voluntarily or through a minor variance asking to actually set closer.
But I don't think that's true. What I'm saying, if I understand this correctly, what I'm saying is that though this stairway on the exterior of the house will be closer to the dune crest than it was previously, it is still further from the dune crest than the southerlymost portion of the structure. We're not decreasing.
That, I understand,
Yeah, okay.
I'm talking
No,
about
but I think your point is important because by way of distinction, if someone were coming here and saying, by reason of raising the house, I need to put a stairwell out in the southerly, which would be the rear of the lot, closer to the dune crest, that would certainly be a further encroachment, but.
Yeah, I'm not pointing out an encroachment, I'm pointing out a sort of an inconsistency in these applications in general. Is that we're raising a house to take it out of harm's
Right.
way. The village of Sagaponic has zoning rules for a whole host of reasons, be it how people experience it if they're on the beach, how they're going to see the house, but they also have setbacks based on the fact that that's a dune bed,
Mhm.
which is what the ocean comes over on occasion. So when we're being asked to move a house higher,
It has other implications.
it has many other implications, but also what we're doing, we're being told we need to move these houses higher to get them out of harm's way. At the same time, owners are making voluntary design decisions to bring elements of their house actually closer to the ocean.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying, there's an
No,
underlying inconsistency.
I take
in
your
that for me.
point, and I think it's important, but what I'm saying is in this particular case, I would distinguish it by saying that the particular further exceedance of the particular component, the stairwell, does not physically move closer to the dune crest than the major portion of the existing structure, which is sort of less offensive than if it were actually extending beyond where the existing structure already exists.
I think like the question of what's offensive,
Yeah,
like
well-
that, I'm not really talking about what's offensive, I'm actually talking about the material of the building.
Yeah.
And that there's two, like, I think we understand,
all right.
and we might, like, in the instance of this application,
Yeah.
I can see, I understand what you're talking about the design of the home and how things have to shift, but what I'm trying to say is that there are, in this style of application, and we see it again in the other one, there are inconsistencies for
All
me.
right, well, then I think it is worth noting, if we grant the application, that no portion of the physical structure will be closer to the dune crest than the existing structure, even though some components of that structure are closer to the dune crest than previously. But there is no, is that correct? Is that-
Yeah, no, I think that's, yeah, the 103 feet is the closest portion that's to the
Yeah.
rear, and that's.
I mean, some of it's just the.
No, I think it's
nuances of our
worthwhile for
side yards,
noting
but
for
these are-
further
yeah.
applications and all that this shouldn't be precedential for suggesting that merely by reason of raising a house, you can get relief from your dune crest setback of any physical portion of the structure, except within the existing footprint of the house.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough? I mean,
Sure.
we're
Yeah,
saying it's slightly
fair
different, but I
enough.
think
We can
I
arm
think
wrestle
we-
later.
Okay. All right, that being said, are there any other comments on the decision or any suggestions as to its possible revision? Anybody? Then I'll entertain a motion to accept this decision as drafted. Do I hear such, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second, okay, so we now have a motion to adopt it and it's been seconded. All in favor of approving the decision, granting the variances? Aye. I'm polling.
You want me to talk
Yeah.
first?
Well, yeah, I was, well, you want to be last?
That's what I always prefer, but
All right, so we'll start at this end. David, you.
Yeah, I actually had extensive conversations with the neighbor directly to the west.
Mhm.
And he actually showed and did a public hearing and spoke and we went through everything that was going on in it and I'm comfortable with it, so, and he's comfortable with it.
So you support.
So I support it.
Okay. All right, Marilyn?
But I do take her, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a discrepancy in the language for what we're approving here, but I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. I think
Okay.
that, I'm not trying to change any of the language. I was actually just using this as an
Okay.
overall point I wanted to make about raising houses on the beach.
We're permitting a decrease in the dune setback with respect to a side lot encroachment, but not with respect to any portion of the mass of the structure is already south of that.
That's what I understood. That's what I understood.
Well, that was the way I understood it, and that's why I'm supporting it as well. So where do you stand on this?
Well, actually, that's one of the reasons I asked if we were going to
By the
take
way,
these as
if you wish,
individual
no,
variants.
you can. if
Yeah,
you
so,
wish.
so, again, I understand the neighborhood.
For the record.
But for the record, I am not inclined to, I can.
Take them one by one.
Right, so, well, I can just start right there, is that number one with the height variance for me is negative.
No, okay.
I can, though I've discussed what I was saying problematically here with two, well, actually number 3, 4, 5, 6. Though I find inconsistencies, I'm inclined to say the neighborhood will not be affected, blah, blah, blah. And I don't have it, but so it is number 1 that I am declining, but the rest of them can run with the property. Does that make sense? Can I do that?
Yeah, okay, so with respect to the discussion and the findings, you've made your comments, but with respect to the grant of relief,
Mhm.
there were 9 requests
Right.
for grant of relief. The one that you are opposed to is the height
Is-
grant,
Mhm.
but you also expressed your concern about number 5, which was the,
I was talking about,
just in principle.
I'm talking about we will talk about it later. I am not, I want to vote against the first of the variances sought. The rest of them, so be it. It's the height variance.
Okay, so before we decide how to handle a partial approval and a partial denial.
Well, that's why I asked if we
No, no,
were
you
going to go
can.
through
You
them one at a
can,
time.
you can. We can grant some of the variance
Mhm.
requests and deny others. So I wanted to know which ones you're in favor of and which ones you're
Right.
against.
Right.
So that if there are other people who support a similar position, we could give a partial grant of
Mhm.
some of the variances and not others. So you're in favor of the decision as drafted.
I am.
I am in favor of the decision as drafted, that's 2 votes. You're in favor of the decision as drafted, with the exception of the number 1, the height restriction, the height variance to 45 feet and 5 inches. Okay, Dawn, it's your turn.
I mean, I'm a little torn on number 1 as well, but it is minimal. So I'm okay with the other ones, but it's the number 1 that I'm having a little bit of a hard time with. But I do feel like it's a minimal amount. So I'm okay with the decision.
Okay, so you will support the decision as drafted, notwithstanding your strong concerns about the height. And in part, I similarly had reservations about the height, but the factors that I've taken into account to nonetheless support the variance. Number 1, because of the nature of the roof slope, the roof on the west side remains at only 41.2 inches, and the roof on the east side remains below the 40-foot height restriction. Most of the roof is only approximately 41 in height, more or less. So even on the sloping roof, which is the part that exceeds the level, approximately half of that roof coming from the north side, where it's most in the proximity to other homes, is still 43
Because
feet
it's
away.
slanted.
So it's only the very peak of the roof at the very southerly edge at the ocean, which reaches to what we all consider to be a very excessive height exceedance of the 45 feet for the 5 feet 5 inches.
Right, if they were to flatten the roof, it would be, I mean, we discussed, would be very expensive for the,
We explored that. We did ask for that as whether that was a feasible alternative that would have made us all a lot more comfortable. And it was explained that it's not so simple to just lower the roof there, because of the nature of that structure would have required beams and basically replacing the entire roof for a relatively minor benefit physically, even though philosophically it is significant.
I
So without belaboring it, okay, John, your
I would vote no.
vote no, okay. So we have 2 no's. We have 2, you voted, yeah, you voted partially no, right? Okay, so we have 1 no in its entirety, We have one in favor, we have two in favor in the entirety,
3 in favor.
3 in favor in the entirety. Okay, so that's sufficient to pass it. So what I would say is, I think by discussing this on the record, we've made quite clear that this was controversial. Everyone on the board was concerned about variances on the oceanfront houses, particularly with respect to height. But with those reservations, only one of the members would vote against granting the height variance. Accordingly, I believe I can state that the decision as drafted stands and all variances requested therein have been granted in accordance with the terms of the written decision. Fair state? Okay.
I think it should be noted that the reason, just for me, the reason why I voted for the height was because of the slope nature of the roof, just as a precedent. So that
Another
was
reason,
key for me.
I think that that was an important physical consideration, but another consideration that I took into account is, as I mentioned earlier, that this is a case where, due to the extent and nature of the alteration, it is required to conform to FEMA standards. Unlike some of the other applications that have been before us, where it is voluntary on the part of the applicant. Okay, with that said, I will leave this matter, place the decision in the records and get a copy to the applicant. Thanks. Okay. That took a little longer than I anticipated. Sorry about that. All right, the second matter that we have on the agenda is a continuation of the hearing on 1 Sand Dune LLC for 110 Sand Dune Court, application 2 of 2022. There are certain overlapping issues and variance requests. Again, the controversial one here is that it is 51 feet 9¼ inch request for a maximum height. There's significant pyramid violations. There was substantial discussion about this as to whether it's a 3-story structure. I did a little research on that myself because it is difficult. You read the definition of story in the code, and it isn't clear. It merely refers to habitable space in between a floor surface and a surface above it, whether it's the lower surface of a story above it or it's a roof. To my eye and to the representative of an opponent to the granting of the variance, this is a 3-story structure. To the physical appearance, there appear to be 3 habitable levels that go up 3 stories. But in conversation with the building inspector and what is commonly interpreted in the code, and not just our code, but others, by the definition of story, treats this as though it were 2 structures adjacent to each other, each of which is 2 stories high because of the way they are offset. That there's 2 stories, and then there are 2 stories, they're next to each other, and even though as a single structure, it would appear to be 3 habitable levels stacked, legally, that's not the case. 2 things. I'm going to recommend to the village board that they consider amending the definition of stories in order to clarify this so that we don't get bogged down in this repeatedly, because I think it is a little bit confusing. In my own personal opinion, I believe that it would appear in a common sense point of view, as opposed to legally, to be 3 stories. I do not believe that it is determinative in this case, because I think the height variance is the height of the structure is more significant than whether it's 2 stories or 3 stories. So I think we will get to that. There probably will be further presentations. We've gotten further information, and I'll allow you to address what I'm saying. I'm speaking out before you, Stan, because I know that you made a written submission on this. Let me just think if there's anything else before we hear further from the applicant and the opposition to the variance. There were supplementary submissions on both sides. I think I need to clarify a couple of things. One was when we were last here and had a discussion, on 2 occasions, because there were already 2 hearings, I had asked whether significant study had been made of feasibility of an alternate location. I specifically mentioned front yard setback, where there's ample front yard setbacks, whether the bedroom that is on the highest elevation, which would be virtually entirely into the requested space of the variance, could be relocated elsewhere on the property, and specifically mentioned the front yard. For some reason, I think Merrily may have mentioned one possibility would be over the garage. Mr. Gilmartin, in your supplementary submission in support of the contention that it was not feasible, you seem to have limited the feasibility analysis to only a structure over the garage and no place else. And I know you mentioned Brown versus Baker versus Brownlee, but nonetheless, I didn't see anything there about any other feasible locations. Secondly, there was some suggestion that the objection to the effect of the elevated structure on views, and again, having mentioned views from the beach, was not exclusive as views from the beach. I went down to the property a few times, and I went to Mr. Kaplan's property, which is one reason I mentioned him, but I also went to the 3 properties on the north of the east-west portion of Sand Dune Court, and observed the structures there from those houses. And from my personal view and taking pictures of those, I saw what the physical appearance is of the structure as it now stands, both in conjunction with the house immediately to the west, owned by the applicant's brother, which was completely reconstructed to be FEMA compliant, and nonetheless is lower in height than the existing applicant's house. I also viewed it from the point of view of the Petrollo house to the east, which is only constructed to what would presumably be the first habitable level. But it's easy to imagine how this structure would appear if it were elevated to the requested variance level. The objection to the master suite was not about its aesthetics, whether it's a blue box or otherwise, although the implication of the supplementary submission was that there was an improper concern about the aesthetics of the structure. I don't think it's that at all. I think the comment about the appearance was not about its architectural design or its aesthetics, but was about its mass and its volume and the placement of that volume. So the reason I'm mentioning these now is that this is an opportunity for both of you to not only support the supplemental materials that you presented, but to respond to at least my comments, and anyone else on the board want to suggest what you ought to be addressing if you get up here again to speak. Okay. Merrily, do you want to supplement what I said or give them any guidance as to what we're looking for out of this presentation?
I don't believe there's anything I can add.
David, you want to add to that?
No.
I talked too much. I apologize.
No, well, I think that was very
Thoughtful.
succinct. Yeah.
No, I think what you mentioned was very thoughtful. So.
John? Okay, so David, we'll take you first as the representative of the proponent, the applicant.
Okay, good afternoon, David Gilmore, Chamber, Charlie from Champion, New York. At our last hearing, we had significant discussions about alternatives, and the one that seemed to have the most serious consideration from this board, and the one that we concentrated on was taking the primary suite and moving it to an area above the garage. And I've given you the reasoning initially behind it, which I think I said at the last hearing, is that it's too expensive to move it. We have supplemented that statement with an estimate from a contractor to do it. And I think one of the real issues that this board has to consider is that the numbers that we gave you aren't one or the other, they're both. So to raise this house is going to cost the $1.9 million, right? On top of any other work that needs to be done. So it's a combo that moving of the master suite is $2.6 million.
So wait a minute, I just want to make sure I understand you correctly. I wasn't clear from the submission whether the 2.68 is the total and that the increment is the difference between the 1.9 and 2.6. You're saying that the 2.6 is in addition to the
In addition
1.9.
to the 1.9. So any work that you do on this house is going to require you to raise it, and that's the number to raise it. And that's, I think that's sort of the end of the story for my client, who does not have that type of money to put into this house. You mentioned a couple of the items that we brought up in the letter, and the aesthetics is more not the aesthetics and the architecture of the house. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. This went through the process with the town of Southampton. They got its ARB approval and it was built. And it's existed there long before this board and this village has existed. The aesthetic argument was more the impact that the house, if we're allowed to raise it, would have on people on the beach. And I think the significant factor there is the separation from the house and the mean high water, which we provide in that letter. So that's what was intended by the term aesthetics. I received a letter last Friday from our neighbors council, and they seem to make two arguments against this. Pat, I don't know if you have the submission that they made.
Yeah. That's this you're talking about?
Yes. I don't know if you can-
Okay, this was a colored rendering by Fleetwood McMullen. Mr. McMullen is here,
Right.
if you want to address that, which shows in different colors.
Thank you. Can I approach
Okay, yeah, go
the
ahead.
screen?
Yeah,
This was presented, and then council forwarded an argument stating what my argument was, and maybe I wasn't clear during that hearing. But my argument is this is not a representation of the pyramid law. The pyramid law, as required by your code, is from the lot line in a pyramid. I mean, this is some sort of rectangle that comes up straight on the building. So I really think that this representation of what the pyramid law is really worthless. I'd also note that it's not signed, it's not dated, and it's not stamped like most architectural plans are. I'd also like to quote for you, just to finish that point, is your code at 24542B, which is your pyramid law, says all buildings or other structures on any lot in any district must be set back from all property lines. And that's our point. This is worthless. I also, and I don't know if I need to submit it, but there is at the end of your code, it tells you how to measure the pyramid law. And it is from the property line, just okay, that for the record. So, I don't.
Want to see this first? Does everybody want to see this first?
Okay, but
That's how the pyramid law is.
I'm just a little puzzled about your comment though, because even though the diagram, let's call it, because it's not a stamped plan, the blue portion, which purports to represent the pyramid, correct?
I don't know.
Purports, well, okay, I will, because Nika will probably bring them up, but I'm just saying it's truncated because it doesn't extend the hypotenuse of the pyramid to the property line, but it would appear, and perhaps he'll address that for us, whether if you were to continue to extend the hypotenuse, which is contained within the blue portion of the drawing, if it were carried out to its ground level, would be consistent with the side lot, but it's just not merely shown on the diagram as being unnecessary.
Well, I would,
I mean, he's not taking the hypotenuse down to the ground at a point other than the property line, which is what you're implying.
that's what it appears to me that he did, and the number that he quotes for the pyramid law is a number that would indicate that that was how it was calculated. When we made this application, we went back and forth with the building department to try and get this right. And, the relief that we have is significantly less. If I can show you on the plan that you have submitted. And again, the ones that were approved by the building department for us to get before this board, here you can see it comes from the property line. Right, and it's a significant number that's.
I take the point, but okay, so what's not clear to me, apart from the side here, which appears to be below the pyramid, so that's a valid point that needs to be explained. But this doesn't show a property line on these plans, so it's
Right,
hard
but
to
it's,
tell.
it is from the property line.
Yeah,
And
but what I'm suggesting is, you see this white area on your plan?
Right.
Which is the entire master suite level of the house. That's outside of the pyramid on both your drawing or your plans and on Mr. McMullen's drawing.
Yeah, but-
So that portion is clearly outside the pyramid, above the pyramid, correct?
Well, I'm not gonna say correct, I'll say that's the area that's outside of the pyramid. I don't know what that is. I don't know where they got the information from the CAD,
Okay.
there's none of the background on it, but I think that the big point is, what the number here that he says is the pyramid exceedance is 47,248, where we have 17,116. That's the point.
Well, that's extraordinary difference, and I can't see it from the two drawings because there doesn't seem to be that magnitude of a difference between what's shown on your plans and what's shown in his diagram.
But.
Okay,
this is-
well,
this is what
it
we
remains,
submitted,
okay, I got it.
and this is what we're
We'll
going
need
forward.
further clarification because we've raised an issue here, in fact, that it's not clear from the documents.
The second argument that was made, neighbor submission, was that the FAR increase and the height increase are substantial. And I think the presentation, the argument that's made in that letter is not consistent with New York State Village Law, which requires you to consider variance applications and the substantiality of them under the totality of the circumstances. And the circumstances here, as I said 100 times during this application, is we're raising the structure to conform with FEMA. Right? And that's it. That's the only reasoning for the application. And that's important. It's important in considering substantiality because we are conforming with the DEC and with FEMA to make this house conforming under those rules, right? We need the variance from you to be able to do that, understood. But we are conforming with FEMA and with the DEC, and I think that's an important factor when you look at substantiality. So I think that argument and the exceedances and the percentage are stated in that letter in a vacuum without considering the totality of the circumstances. And I'd ask that you follow New York State Village Law when you consider.
So. So my question is that we are conforming, doing something, raising the house is something that FEMA is basically saying, if you're gonna build on the beach, make sure your house is up, how high? 17?
17 for
Make
FEMA.
sure,
and
but what
2 feet
FEMA
previous.
doesn't talk about, and nobody talks about for whatever reason, is you can conform with FEMA and you can conform with the village, you just can't build a skyscraper on the beach. There's just height variances. FEMA allows you and asks you to go 17 feet up, and the village says, great, you want to go 17 feet up, that's better for our homes in the neighborhood. But nobody within FEMA or this village says, therefore, you're also conforming when you're far above our height. Like, and so I realize that this is an existing home, but this is a significant variance. The height is a significant variance. Probably other ones are too, but the height is something that I'm just focusing on because people keep saying, as if FEMA is saying, put your house higher above other homes, above height restrictions. All they're saying is put it higher from the ocean, which includes nothing of the sky. Well, it includes a lot of the sky actually, but not in this sense. And so that for me is just over and over and over. I will come back to that because the other thing that people don't consider when they talk about the neighborhood is the neighborhood that includes the beach, which in my opinion is nothing short of a national park that anybody can enjoy. Homes on the beach change the nature of that area. And if you don't believe me, we can all go down to the beach and look where the dunes have been developed compared to where they have not. And so the height variance for me isn't really, it has nothing to do with FEMA. FEMA's asking to lift homes, but they're not asking to make them taller.
Well, I think I understand your comments and respectfully, I disagree, right? But I think that what you raise and what needs to be considered by this board and maybe the village is the challenge of somebody with an existing home that has a CO that's legal and wants to save it. And where we are today is this house has to start with its first floor elevation at 19 feet. So you're squeezed from the bottom and then you're squeezed at 40 from the top. And understand that there is a limitation on what you can have on the ground floor. So a lot of the operational and the systems of this house are contained on the first floor.
But would you,
So that squeeze in this particular instance, with this particular house, with the inability, because remember it's raised, I think 8 feet already, there's a squeeze there, so you can't go out. And you know, there's a limitation up, and up is the only way to try and maintain
You said
some
you
livable
can't go out,
space.
I assume you're talking about
You
east-west,
can go
but you
back.
could go north. You still have setback. front
Well,
yard setback.
I mean, from a
I guess,
practical.
you know, something I'd be curious to know in general, maybe not specifically about this. When a home is being constructed, wherever it might be, are there parts of the environment that need to be considered? Right? Like, right, always. Okay.
They had an expert here at 2 of the last meetings who was an expert in FEMA who acknowledged forthrightly that if you're designing a home, you design it to comply with FEMA and local regulations. This is an existing home, so there is a difference.
No design.
It's also a home that isn't required to conform to FEMA. It's a decision to conform to FEMA. And it's a decision where the applicant has indicated a preference for architectural design over safety. They
That's not
want.
true. That's not true. It's
She,
simply not true.
well, she wants to raise the height to protect it for FEMA, which is not required to do, but she wants to retain an architectural design that is, I can't remember the terminology used last time, but there's a certain affection for the existing architecture. So they're sort of between a rock and a hard place. You can protect the house by making it safer and voluntarily complying with FEMA, which you're not required to do. But you may have to make a sacrifice in some of the architectural design. On the other hand, if you want to adhere to the architectural design, maybe you have to make a bit of a sacrifice in terms of the safety. It seems to me to be the applicant's decision as to what to do with the house. But we have regulations here, and this is an extraordinary exceedance. This is an extraordinary increase. I took pictures from the homes across, and I looked at them to try to visualize it. In fact, the home immediately to the west of this house, owned by the applicant's brother, was completely reconstructed to be totally FEMA compliant and is still lower than this applicant's existing structure without it even being raised.
Well, again, with our neighbors on either side, they had a blank slate to start with, right?
There was a house,
No, there was a house.
Right, but that-
Howard Lutnick had a house
He
next
got knocked
to
down, and he started from scratch.
it. Well, he did, that was his election, he didn't have to do that.
Exactly, it was his election, and.
Well, that's what I'm saying about Ms. Lutnick, the applicant here, is that she is electing to raise the house. She could elect to modify its architectural design in order to comply with the regulations, as opposed to not bringing it into a safer, it doesn't even have to be raised to FEMA limits. It could, for example, be raised halfway up, I assume.
No,
Can
it
it not?
cannot.
Can, if they raise it at all, it has to go to FEMA
It has
limits?
to go to FEMA limits. I mean, that question is more about a substantial improvement, right? What's the number on the substantial improvement? And we have a number.
But this house is not mandated by FEMA to be lifted at all.
Well, you know, I mean,
And-
mandated, did they send us an order?
No.
But we
Is
provided
it
you with the background.
legally
If I can
required?
answer your question, you've asked a lot of questions.
Well, but you're not answering my question, and you're evading my question.
I'm
You're evading my question.
not evading, I'm trying
Yeah.
to answer and then you interrupt.
I even gave you the opportunity before you got up just now to address an issue that concerned me, which is I specifically pointed out that there were alternative locations, including within the front yard setback. Yet you persistently, and even after I made that point, are focusing on it's too expensive to put it above the garage, merely because Merrily Foster suggested that as one of the possibilities. Similarly, I pointed out repeatedly that I think this elevation will have an impact on other houses to the north, and yet you consistently talk about the views from the beach, merely because Merrily Foster was concerned about the beach. She is raising examples of objections to this, and I'm telling you that we're talking about something that's far more extensive than those two examples. There are other feasible locations which you haven't even addressed, and we are talking about the impact on other locations than from the beach, which you haven't addressed.
Okay, if I could, the first, when I spoke about the views from the beach, that was an explanation of the question that you initially raised when I was sitting down, and it was responsive to that. I'll respond to all your questions, I just need the opportunity to do it.
Go ahead.
Right, so I guess I'll take them in reverse order. We do not have the ability to go south towards the ocean. Are we all agreed on that?
Right.
We do not have the ability to go north towards Sandome because it'll interfere with our septic system and it'll be more expensive than what we have because we're driving new pilings and losing square footage. We have looked at that. That was rejected, but we did look at it. We talk about environmental. I agree. You have to look at applications, certainly in any municipality in a land use, you're subject to secret. Here, it's a type 2 action, but do consider the environment. And FEMA tells you about the environment is you should raise the houses so the houses do not cause harm to area houses and do not get destroyed themselves and do not destroy the environment if they're hit by a storm.
Ask the question.
Sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned the septic. If you were to do, if anything, because that's in the, I don't know if is that considered the front yard or the rear? It's the front yard, the north boundary of the property. Does that have one of the, I'm guessing that means that the septic is in the ground as opposed to being one of the,
Correct.
but with this construction, I think you'd also have to replace that septic, wouldn't they?
But that's the only place to do it.
Is to put the above ground, right? If you're, so when this house gets replaced, the existing septic,
Raised.
right, whatever the case, right, so, yeah. The existing septic that is in ground will become one of the digester units above ground that will be in the northern portion.
I don't think that that's true. I think the survey says existing.
But isn't
septic-
that the existing septic
to
could stay?
remain? I think it will be upgraded, but
Which I
remember,
think means it has to come, but this doesn't matter.
I don't think it has to come above because of the depth to groundwater, I think
2 feet.
is okay there. Right? I mean, at least that's my understanding. I can give you more information on that, but there is, you remember, we have setbacks from other structures, right, that we have to meet. So that's the only place to have the septic system. So there's a squeeze top to bottom and left to right.
I hear you say that that's the only place to place the septic. Just for the record, there's nothing in evidence that it couldn't be relocated. However, that's beside it. You presented a statement that that's the only place for it, but I don't have anything in the record that establishes that.
Just if I could, just one more so that,
Yeah.
so that we're electing to do it.
Yeah.
We provided you and I stood before you and argued that it is not an if this area is going to get hit, it's a when. And I think we provided the background of that through a study that was done in the town of East Hampton. So I don't question the value of raising the structure or the importance of doing so. I asked you a question that you still haven't answered though, which was, this is not mandated by any law that the house be raised. There is no law that requires the house to be raised. Right. And I've answered
FEMA
that.
has set forth a standard that is a desired standard where it's voluntary and a mandated standard where it's a new construction, correct? Is there anything that would, for example, not suggesting that you have to do that, but that one could raise the house, for example, 15 feet instead of 20 feet, since it's not being raised, it's not required to be raised to FEMA level at all? Can it legally be raised to less than a FEMA level, which would provide a substantial degree of safety, except in perhaps the 1 in 100-year storm? But it would still then maintain the architectural integrity of this structure, but not require as much of a variance in height.
So I attempted to answer that previously, and I believe I was interrupted. And the answer is not as direct as you think, no, we can't. But it comes into a different part of your law, which is the substantial improvement. And if you do the analysis under the substantial improvement, we can spend 1.3 million before we're required to conform to FEMA. The raising of this will cost more than that number.
So the cost of raising it would then subject you to the FEMA requirement, which would require it to go to the entire 17 plus 2 free.
That's correct.
Okay, I got it. I appreciate that answer.
Yep.
All right, now the other, but related to that, I am a little puzzled because, as I said, when I first saw it, we only got it today, the cost analysis of doing the modification of the master suite to another location as opposed to just the cost of raising seemed extraordinary. I mean, even if you take $1,000 a square foot, which is a generous allowance for new construction, which includes bathrooms, kitchens, utilities, and a lot of expensive appliances and things, and you're taking what is essentially a shell, a master suite, even at $1,000 a square foot, that would add $1 million. 1,000 square feet at $1,000 a foot would add $1 million. I don't know how we have $2.6 million of additional expense to reconstruct 1,000 square foot master suite.
Andres, sorry, I don't know if Andres, the architect, is available. The one thing I would say is that $1,000 a square foot to build from scratch, I understand. I think that this is a lot more delicate of a construction. I don't know if we have our architect who's the one that dealt with.
Yes, I'm on.
Andres, can you talk to the numbers that RES came up with?
Introduce yourself, please.
Good afternoon. It's Andras from Studio MDA.
He's the architect.
Yes. So you understand the question?
It's how did we get to the 2.6 million?
Yeah, I mean, I saw the numbers on a data sheet there, but conceptually, I'm trying to understand how it can cost $2,600 a square foot for a master suite.
Well, the team that we worked with broke it out in divisions, so it's pretty detailed. There is a decent amount of millwork and carpentry to demolish what's there currently because the footprint has to change. The windows and everything needs to be replaced. We can't just simply cut the building off and lower it. There's a decent amount of work that needs to be done to do that.
Yeah, but
You could build a small house for that. It's true.
you could build a large house any place except here.
Correct.
No, it just seems extraordinary to me that you can raise the entire existing house for $1,945,000, and yet to relocate a master suite, which isn't even 1,000 feet. I mean, it's a master bedroom is 600 feet or so, and the master bathroom is 200 or 300 square feet. But to relocate those either within or to the north of into the front yard setback or over the garage as another alternative, which you rejected, can cost 2.680, which is more than the cost of raising the entire structure, substantially more. Okay, I mean, I see the numbers. I got this today. There's a spreadsheet, but I'm not in construction. And, first of all, I don't know the validity of the numbers, but even if I did, I still can't make sense of how it could cost so much.
It doesn't make sense.
Andres, can you, can you speak to what it will take to remove the primary suite and then relocate it? Because I don't think it doesn't seem to me that it's as easy a construction as just, building something from scratch. Can you talk to what's involved in relocating it, demolishing without hurting the other parts of the structure?
Yeah, I mean, you're also looking at new roofs where there's currently habitable space. You're looking at structural modifications, most likely to the foundation, because at the moment the foundation's loads are calculated at a certain assumption as to the loads of the house. And so when you lower the volume, or you actually change the at least in that particular area, the integrity of the foundation. So that would have to be looked at, and they put in some money for that. You're also looking at removing and demolishing windows and doors and all of the fenestration, because it's impossible to remove all of that without damaging it and surgically demolishing it. So those would have to be replaced. And of course, the demolition of the existing program in the home that this volume would take the place of.
So let's take a line item, HVAC, $90,000. A brand new HVAC unit, completely ducted, connected, installed for 1,000 square foot of habitable space. $90,000? I think I'm gonna live in a place where I don't need air conditioning.
These are fake numbers.
I mean, it's inconceivable to me. Just these numbers don't make any sense. I take the electrical work, $85,000 for electrical work for a bedroom and bathroom.
I see the thing that I think that you're not taking into consideration is the relocation.
No, I got the relocation. That's another line items, David. This is specific for electric. This is specific for HVAC.
Like, but it includes the demolition, correct?
Demolition is very cheap, but not
But not this demolition. I mean, there has to be some admission that it's not your typical demolition.
Site work, demolition. There's a line item for that. Sites, 84,000. There's a line item for general requirements, including project and site Okay, I'm sorry, I don't want to belabor it,
These are
and I don't
not-
want to spend
these are
more
not
time on the
real
costs.
numbers.
I frankly find these costs to be difficult to digest and believe as being realistic, but regardless of that, I would say that though the cost of conforming to a feasible alternative may have some relevance, it's not necessarily even the determinative factor. Even if it costs a lot of money, this is a very valuable property, which is the very reason that the applicant seeks to raise it out of harm's way. And I would think that some substantial expenditure to do that is a cost of doing that. Okay,
And that substantial cost is in the raising of the house. That's
no,
what
the
the
raising
cost
of the house is nothing compared to adding another bedroom.
So whatever that cost is, whatever you assign to it, the applicant here has the financial capability to raise it, but not to move the room. That's the.
She can spend $2 million to raise it, but not $2 million to relocate a master bedroom.
Let's say, but it's not that, you mean an additional 2 million? Is that, I don't understand the
Well,
question.
I don't believe that it's an additional $2 million.
Well, whatever that number is, it's over and above.
There is an
1.9.
additional cost. There's an
Over the
additional
one
cost.
1.9, whatever that cost is, I think it's substantial, then it's substantial to my client.
Again, I'm sorry, I don't want to belabor it, take everyone's time. Do you have any comments? Anybody else here? Do you want, I didn't mean to cut you off if you have more to present.
No, I just asked the opportunity to respond
Okay, you have it.
to other comments.
Anyone else here before? Okay, Nika, you are on.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nika Strunk, 37 Windmill Lane, Southampton, New York, for the neighbors Anthony and Cynthia Petrello. I'm gonna speak first, and then I'm gonna ask Mr. McMullen to talk about his pyramid analysis. For the record, I heard the applicant's attorney say at the last hearing that the pyramid plane started at the FEMA base flood elevation, which would be in this case 17 feet in the air. That came as a shock to me. Mr. McMullen inquired with Mr. Woodsma and was told that that's not the case. It actually, apparently, there is something given to property owners in FEMA zones by Mr. Woodsma, where he will allow the pyramid plane to start at 2 feet above grade to compensate for the freeboard.
The freeboard.
Right. I don't know where that comes from in the code. I didn't find that in the code. I think when my client and his architects were designing their home, they would have been interested in that. I did not know about it. But that was the basis for Mr. McMullen to prepare his revised drawings. He will explain this further, but I think that the reason that we're getting to such a very large number is because 45,000 cubic feet outside of the non-conforming is because he's taking into account not only the pyramid plane, but also the height and the side yard setbacks, which are very significantly infringed by this existing home. And will be even more so if the property is raised as is.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yes.
So the diagram that we were just asked to look at, which we looked at, does that already reflect the base of the pyramid level at 2 feet above? So the applicant
Yes.
has already been given the benefit of the doubt of the additional 2 feet at the base of the pyramid, and the red area on this diagram is that which is exceeding the permitted pyramid, even though the base level started 2 feet above what normally would.
That's my understanding, and Mr. McMullen, I'm sure will confirm that, but yes, that's correct. And it's a lesser calculation than our previous submission, but it's still unbelievably huge. And even if the applicant's calculations were taken in, are considered just, on their own, it's by their own calculation, at least 17,000 cubic feet of non-conformance with the pyramid plane. So we think it's a lot more, but nonetheless, it is a massive, massive nonconformance. And that's the case again with the FAR. It's a 47% variance that's requested. Ms. Lutnick opposed, and this board denied my client's application for a 32% variance for the property right next door. We were granted a 2-foot 4-inch height variance, which Ms. Lutnick also opposed vigorously, and now she's seeking nearly 12 feet. This is something, I mean, if these variances are granted, you're going to see my clients coming in with a new application, because it will be a very different landscape in terms of what this board is doing. I think precedent is a serious issue here. And at the last hearing or a prior one, Chairman Mizell rightly said that this board views each application and evaluates it on its own merits. But nonetheless, you have to consider precedent. We went back and we looked at some of the comments from my client's hearing application on September 10th, 2021. The chairman stated, "I'm concerned a bit about precedent. I'm concerned that there are a number of lots along the ocean front which will be characterized as part of the neighborhood and allowing houses to exceed the current regulations of the village based upon pre-existing homes that we had no control over could create a situation where they could come back and seek variances of the other now vacant oceanfront lots, citing that it's not changing the neighborhood." So precedent, I think, is a genuine concern. I can tell you, you will see more applications of this nature. Anyone with a pre-existing house in a FEMA zone that doesn't comply with current base flood elevations would be able to come into this board seeking huge height and pyramid and setback variances to raise up their existing houses. And so granting this application will absolutely open the door to that. And I don't think that's what the board wants to do, and certainly not based upon its decision in the recent application of 1145 Stack Main Street. As far as the cost analysis that I also received this afternoon, I also question the calculations. I think you have to take into account the value of the property to begin with. I don't know what that is. I know it's very, very valuable. It's probably, I think it's, I looked up the assessment, it's assessed at 14.2 million. That's obviously low. And also, I think the response to the inquiry about other feasible alternatives for the location of the really most egregious part of this house, the primary bedroom on the top floor, was quite conclusory. I don't know where the septic system is located. We don't really know if there is another place to put this primary bedroom. We don't know if it's a feasible alternative to not have a primary bedroom. There are a number of other bedrooms already existing in this house. Some of them could be cast as primary bedrooms. Now, I want to get into the 3-story question of the number of stories, because I received a copy through Mr. Gilmartin's submission of an email from Mr. Woodsma that stated, just put there and make sure. In my review of the existing and proposed plans for 110 Sand Dune Court, I find the current house is a 2-story dwelling. The floors are offset from one another as to not have 3 stories of habitual, I think he means habitable, living space over one another. The proposed plan will create a 3-story house by the addition of the lower entry foyer. We have filed an appeal from that interpretation, because I think it is really a very, very important question. And we filed that yesterday. I just feel like I've gone through the looking glass. I don't understand how it's possible to say that there are not 3 floors of habitable space above the proposed, new garage and foyer area. And Pat, I wondered if we could if you could bring up the floor plans that are, that you have been submitted, starting with A104. I appreciate it. Take your time. Okay, so actually, I can't really read it from here, so I'm going to go a little closer. So this is the proposed, I'm sorry, you can go
I'm
back.
sorry, tell me which one?
The one of, this one to start with. This is, I think, A104, if you, yeah, perfect. So this is the proposed ground floor plan with the 3-car garage and the elevator and vestibule. Okay, we understand. That's the ground floor. There's no habitable space there. Could you go to the next sheet directly below? Great. Okay, so now this is what they call the lower level plan. This has 1, 2, 3 bedrooms. I think 1, 2, 3 baths, a very large workshop. I think this is laundry, mechanical, and storage. Okay, so that's one level of habitable space with 3 bedrooms plus a workshop. Go to the next level, the next sheet. Now here you have another bedroom, a studio, another bath, living room, I think kitchen, I think that's pantry, bath, family room, and dining area.
Would you say after family room? Sorry.
Sorry, family room and dining area. And that's the main floor plan. And if you go one more, please, you have the primary suite. And that's the master bed, you have an elevator, foyer, master bedroom, master bath, and closet. So, I mean, I just don't see how there's any way in which this is not 4 floors. Now, I do understand that there's been an argument about stacking, but I don't think you look at stories as, Jenga blocks that you can have like a little gap underneath somewhere, and therefore you're not having a story on that level, because this is not 2 houses, this is 1 house. And if actually, could you go one more? I think we're getting into the
Before you do
elevation.
that, I have a question, because it's not
Yes.
clear to me, from the drawings or from the plans that I've just looked at. I have 2 questions here. One is factual and one is legal. Now, assuming that it is true that floors which are stacked adjacent to, but not above one another, aren't additive. From the plan, it looks like these are overlapping, that they're not independent, that there is some degree of stacking of some of the habitable space.
I agree with that.
The elevator and the stairwell.
Is that all?
Yeah.
Okay, so the entire master suite is to the south.
Has another layer.
Or to
below,
the-
but
to the
that's
west.
elevator above grade.
Okay,
So you can walk underneath the floor of the room below that,
okay, so it's only the elevator and the hallway that are stacked effectively.
which under Southampton's code are not considerable habitable space and are allowed to be connectors. Just as the elevator overrun is allowed to also go above the sky plane, which our code would allow.
We are in the village of Sagaponic, and I don't know if the village of Sagaponic wants to do that. I don't know that it's, I don't know that it's clear, and I don't think it's clear at all in the code that that is allowed. And I don't know if this board has ever made an opinion or an interpretation on that point, but we've teed that up for you, and that's going to be a separate application where you will be asked to make an interpretation on that point.
In that vein, counsel, you may not want to answer this today, but you want to start thinking about whether we can render a decision on this application during the pendency of an appeal of the interpretation of stories.
So that's a separate application, that appeal of the building inspector's determination. So at this time, what's before you is already, the building inspector's already rendered a determination, the turn down letter. That's what's before us. So that's going to be the focus of the decision.
would you go one more sheet down, please, Pat? Because we're gonna see the elevations. Now, I think on top is the existing elevation and on the bottom is the proposed elevation. This is a house that looks like a 4-story house, that acts like a 4-story house, that feels like a 4-story house. And I don't see how any kind of very technical stacking argument gets around that. Is this the type of house that this board wants to allow?
I think I commented on that before everyone got up in saying that to a common sense point of view or to a layman, you're looking at a 2-dimensional rendering of a 3-dimensional structure. And in a flat plane, it's undeniable that there would be 4 stories there or 3 habitable stories. But if you turn it around to the other side, you're going to see 2 stories adjacent to 2 stories. So from this angle, it looks like 4, but in 3 dimensions, it is not technically under the code in accordance with the current interpretation of stories, which you are challenging, which is why I asked whether we can render a decision which relates to whether it's 3 stories or not, but what's before us is actually more the height variance than whether this is 3 stories based upon the letter.
All right, I appreciate that. My clients would be very interested in having a 4-story house or something that looks like, has this number of levels that is 52 feet above sea level. I mean, that they would think that is great, and they would be very happy to propose to build that if this variance is granted. I really don't think that's a door that this board wants to open. I don't think that this board wants houses that look like this in this village at all. And as far as my clients who are complying with the story requirement and have a very, very modest height variance, they do not want to live next to that will be towering over them, and that will be from all outwards appearances a 4-story house. So I think that's a really important point, and we will get to it then on our separate application. I'm not going to repeat all the previous arguments I've made. I think I've spoken quite a bit, and you have my arguments, but if there's anything I can add, I'm happy to address it.
Questions? Questions?
No.
No?
Okay.
Do we anticipate that there's going to be further testimony, a submission of documentation, or further studies of feasibility, or are we going to close the meeting? Any opinion on that? Close the hearing?
I don't think I have anything further to add.
David, do you want an opportunity to make any further submissions or rebuttals or anything? You can do that now, but
If we can get 2 weeks to make a written submission, you raise submissions that I think we need to address, but if you close it, and we can make written submissions, I think that would.
in past experience, I think it becomes problematic if we close the hearing and then permit further written submissions, because then we don't have the opportunity to address the further submissions. So in that respect, if you wish to make further submissions, we will welcome them. But we will then move to continue the hearing rather than close it. Do you want to make any comments today? Or you want to reserve them for that period of time?
I would ask that we close the hearing. Before we do that, I just, one comment about the stories. This is an existing house that has been approved as a 2-story house. The 3rd story comes in on this application because of the vestibule on the ground floor for the elevator. But that's, in the court parlance, it's been asked and answered, right? That has existed, and we're merely seeking to raise exactly what's there. So, it's a 3-story house. Building inspector has said so, and prior building inspectors that have looked at the structure have done so. So we'd ask that you close the public hearing.
So you're,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I forgot to ask Mr. McMullen to stand up and
okay.
address his.
all right, so just a clarification before we sit down there, but then you're saying that you are satisfied with your presentation today and you are waiving the opportunity to make a further written submission
Yes.
after we close the hearing.
Yes, if you close it.
if we close.
I don't want to wait.
No, I got it. No, I want to be fair to everybody. I'm just saying that if you're gonna make a further submission, then people are gonna want an opportunity to address that submission. If you're waiving the right to make the further submission, if we close the hearing, is what I was asking. Thank you. Yes, Nika, you want to have Mr. McMullen speak?
Okay, if I stand over here.
Sure.
Jim, do you want this? or-
The
pyramid
renderings that we.
drawing.
Jim
Rendering.
McMullen from Fleetwood, McMullen and Sanabria, East Hampton. So this drawing that we did is a volume calculation of the portions of the building that not only break the plane of the pyramid law, but also the side yard setback and the height. Because in your code, when you're looking at variances, you take into a height regulation, a pyramid law, as well as setbacks, because of the portion of non-conformity becomes more once you raise that portion of the building that is outside the setback. So that's why we show the portions in red. And if you can maybe scroll down so you can see up on the top portion of this screen. Yeah, so this says the building volume outside the pyramid, the height, and the side yard setback dimensional requirements. So it's not just a pyramid study. It's also how it impacts on the side yard setbacks as well as the height. And then with this, we modified this according to Mr. Woodman's allowance of the 2 feet above property line. So that's why the amount has dropped around 2,000 square feet, cubic feet of volume. But that's how we got to this.
All right. I think that this raises an issue that I would like a clarification to make sure that I understand it correctly, because there was some discussion. There was a contention that when you elevate the structure, any previously non-conforming setback encroachments then become more non-conforming, and that is taken into account. However, distinct from whether or not there is an elevation which creates more mass within the required setback, even if that does not constitute an increase in the nonconformity in the sideline setbacks. It is, by this rendering, it will increase the nonconformity under the pyramid rule. So that's a factual matter which is not disputed, that raising the structure where there are encroachments in the side lot, though they do not increase the side lot nonconformity, clearly do increase the pyramid law nonconformity. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Or creates.
Or create, okay. Because it was a little bit, again, unclear or ambiguous as to whether the raising of the structure created a greater nonconformity. It does not in the side lot setback, but it may, or in fact here does in the pyramid.
My position, which I've set forth in prior briefs, is that it does result in an increase in the nonconformity of the side yard setback.
Even if not encroaching on the pyramid.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
That's-
that is my position,
Okay.
yes.
is that briefed in your papers?
Yes, it is,
Okay,
yes.
thank you. David?
Quickly to that point, we obtained an interpretation from the building inspector that it does not increase the nonconformity.
Which is the position that I was articulating just a moment ago.
One, and two, I'm not sure what you're saying about increasing the pyramid law. The pyramid law.
No, not increasing the pyramid law, increasing the encroachment under the pyramid law.
Look, I mean, the encroachment's the encroachment, as we've demonstrated in the
The
diagram.
degree of encroachment. When you raise a structure, it will breach that hypotenuse of the pyramid and increase the degree of nonconformity with the pyramid law, even if it does not increase the degree of nonconformity in the side lot setback.
Right, raising the house and increase the height and it increases. the
Yeah.
pyramid.
But it's sort of two different exceedances that we're talking about, one of which there's a dispute as to whether it does or it doesn't. The building inspector's opinion was consistent with your interpretation that the mere raising of the house with side lot setback exceedances does not increase the degree of exceedance of the side lot setback. But independently, it may, and in this case does, increase the degree of exceedance of the pyramid law.
Raising the house creates more pyramid relief.
Yeah. Okay, and that includes those side lot encroachments, not just at the top.
Well, I mean,
But it wasn't shown on your plans.
well, I think if you come back to the, and Pat, I don't know if you can bring up that one.
I mean, you specifically objected to the showing on the diagram of the red area outside of the permissible pyramid in the side, as opposed to only the structure on the top. And your plans, your own plans, yeah, it's right there. So you're not showing,
The one with the green, the one that we submitted later individually. I mean, I objected to that whole.
yeah,
Right,
and it's not stamped, it's not,
Yeah, the whole
scale.
thing, but if,
it's illustrative, but it's not.
right, so,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that we submitted, I don't know if you remember this, an area that was identified in green that I think shows the exceedance. And we discussed at length in previous hearings, the area that's really up at the 51 isn't the entirety of that floor. So, you know, I think that while what you say conceptually is true, in practice, I think you have to consider when you look at the plans, you know, the area that's that high. So the one that's the part that's at 51.9 is the elevator overrun and the chimney. And I think take that into account when you consider the amount that's in exceedance.
And the top of the roof of the master suite itself was what, about 47, was it, if I recall?
47. Good number.
This one, David?
Yeah, so that, this I think is you.
Oh, there's the green, yeah. Okay.
Right, so. Yeah, so this is the chimney, that's the elevator overrun, and those are those are the structures that are up at the highest number, right? And then, so as, you know, as you bring this up in the pyramid, we have, this is the area that exceeds the pyramid.
No, I
Just
take
as
your
we
point on
understand.
that in the green, but what your diagram here is not showing any area on the side that Mr. McMullen's rendering, we'll call it, did show as being outside the permissible pyramid, you know, on the
Well, no,
side.
this is a pyramid diagram, this is what's outside the pyramid wall. This, you know, this little spot here and then the balance there, that's what exceeds it,
Okay.
and that's where the cubic foot is.
So you're not only rejecting technically this drawing, you're saying that it's misleading. It's showing areas of red on the side of the structure as being outside of the permissible pyramid in the side lots.
Combination of height, pyramid, and side yard setback.
All three planes.
So when you look at the blue and it's a vertical plane, that's the side yard setback.
Okay,
if
so
you
this
look at-
is
if you look at
misleading.
this portion,
This is misleading. Okay, so I'm looking at the lower left drawing and I'm looking at an area of red. And you're telling me that what you have illustrated in this illustration
yes,
is areas which exceeds one or more of those regulatory requirements. But the area in red on the side of the structure violates the side yard setback, but not the pyramid.
yes.
Then I think Mr. Gilmartin's point is well taken. I think that the drawing is quite misleading because it seemed to suggest that that area in red on the side was outside of the permissible pyramid.
Yeah,
There
that
just
was
needs
not
to
our
be more
intention.
colors for coding.
Okay, all right.
like
It may not have been your
more colors
intention,
for
but it
the-
wasn't clear.
Okay.
So I think it's really important that we clear that up. So then it is acknowledged that the only portion of the structure which is impermissible outside of the pyramid law is essentially the master suite.
No.
The rest of it would appear to be violations of the side yard setback, but not the pyramid.
No.
Well, also, on this one here, this shows only one side. This side over here, all this in white, which is deck. on
Yeah,
second
deck,
floor,
the deck too,
That
yeah.
actually is in violation as well.
All right,
It's
so-
not just the portion of.
Yeah.
of
And
time.
and I'm sorry to jump in, but there's a large area on the east side of the house that you cannot see based on the applicant's diagram, illustrations. You go back to that, they've only given you two views. They've only given you the view from, sorry to make you keep switching. hat.
Well, I see it on your drawing, I see it on the diagram, I see it from all different,
Yeah.
and I see a lot of the red that you're showing on your rendering is perhaps a violation of the side yard setback, and even an augmentation of a violation of the side yard setback, but which is not a violation of the pyramid
Well,
regulation.
if you look at, and I think we're looking at the same
Together.
drawing, but if you look at the view looking southeast, which is the bottom left,
Mm-hmm.
Here's the house.
yeah, this is theirs. What we're showing you is, sorry, the view from that direction. And in fact, it's not just deck that's, violating the pyramid. There's a lot of building underneath there that they have not shown you that is violating the pyramid plane. And because they've only chosen to show you the two best angles, you're not seeing
Okay.
the full violation.
I see what you're talking about. I can see it on the rendering here, but I'm still a little bit puzzled because the 47,248 cubic feet is alleged to be outside A, pyramid,
Yes,
B, height,
yes,
and C, side yard setback dimension.
yes.
If you delete from that 47,000 square feet, that portion of the volume which encroaches in the side yard setback, as opposed to just the pyramid and height, what would the exceedance be? It wouldn't be 47,000 square feet. How much is it reduced? Do you have any idea, an estimate?
Not off the top of my head.
Quarter, a third? I mean, they're saying 17,000 square feet of exceedance. You're saying 47,000, but you're including in your definition of an exceedance a substantial amount of cubic footage, which is not a violation of the pyramid law. I'd like to sort of get some idea. Do you have any idea, Dan?
What I'd say is we provided the pyramid law sketch, which I pointed to.
Yeah.
We went through that thoroughly with the building inspector to come to the 17,000 number. There were a couple of misstarts on it because we didn't get it right, but ultimately sitting with the building inspector, we got it right.
Quick question. Does that 17,000 include not only the white areas shown on this diagram, but the other side of the property to which Nika is referring that's not shown on the diagram, but is in fact included in the 17,000 square feet?
Andres, are you still there? Can you answer that? I believe it does.
Yes, it does. In the second drawing especially, we broke it down into components, and I actually have the 3D model on my screen. I'm happy to share just to show you how it does, although we only show one angle, the model, obviously I can spin around it and show you all the components that are encroaching.
Do you want to share it?
Sure.
Okay, so that the 17,000 square feet does take into account that portion of the structure which is outside of the permissible pyramid lines, even though it was not shown on that particular drawing.
Does it also include the cubic footage that is over the height limitation?
So I don't know if you can see my screen, but basically the maroon is the pyramid capped out at the 40, and then every single element of the building, obviously simplified but taken from our
So
3D
we
model,
see-
shows all the sides being counted. So that's I guess Ms. Strunk is referring to this side. This is obviously the looking south towards the beach, the blue volume being here, the master. the top of the living room, and then the volume in the back facing the beach. So all components were taken into consideration.
Can you email that to Pat, so it's part of the record?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Is anyone not exhausted enough to continue this? I really am reluctant to allow further, in this email of this, which is now in the record before us, to get it documented is fine, that you can do that afterwards. But apart from that, if we close the hearing, we will not accept any further submissions. That's acceptable to all? Okay, is that acceptable to the board? Okay. Then I will entertain a motion to close the hearing on this application. Someone gonna move that?
I'll move.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so it's unanimous. We've closed the hearing on this matter, and we have 61 days to render a decision. We will deliberate over that. Now, because of the open hearings requirements, even though it's a little bit risky perhaps, I would suggest that we can begin our deliberations now before we adjourn this meeting. If anyone wants to discuss this, otherwise we would have to discuss this in pairs because we can't have three of us confirmed together at any one time. So that's fair statement.
That's right.
And do you have a recommendation as to whether we do that
I would recommend whenever you can to deliberate as the board.
as a whole?
Meeting, yes.
So then,
There's no
yeah,
questions.
it is dark out, but it's only 4:30, so let's give it a little bit of time. We don't have to come to a decision tonight, but I would like some feedback on all that you've heard, some of which is complicated and of first impression, and some of which is disputed, but some of which is clear. I mean, there's no dispute that the highest point here is an extraordinary variance for height, 51 feet. There's substantial testimony that some of that is elevator, bulkhead, and passageway, and that the majority, significant majority of the encroachment is actually only 47 feet or approximately. I think that's important to take into account. I think in terms of the violation of the pyramid law, as we were just discussing, the diagrams can be a little bit misleading because it's not comparing apples to apples. And that to the extent that the rendering by Mr. McMullen showed exceedances that included side yard setback encroachments, and there is a dispute, which has been briefed and we'll have to look at, as to whether the raising of the structure does or does not increase the nonconformity of the side yard setback would have a bearing on the amount of cubic footage for which the variance would effectively be granted. There is also some consternation in my part at the additional expense of using at least one feasible alternative, which has been explored, which would be to put the master suite above the garage. But I haven't seen any substantial evidence that other possible feasible alternatives have in fact been explored, including the substantial front yard setback, which could accommodate more structure. There is a dispute as to whether this will be 3 habitable stories. I'm ignoring the ground floor, which we disregard anyway, even if it's technically a story. We have the building inspector's interpretation, which appears to be consistent with prior law and custom, that if the stories are stacked or adjacent to each other and not stacked, that they're not additive. But the number of stories would seem to be less significant than the height of the requested variance. I don't know if I've left out, the FEMA regulation. I think everyone on the board and from previous hearings as well is sympathetic to the desire of a homeowner to protect their property. It's good for the village, it's good for the neighbors, and it's good for the applicant. There is clearly a distinction between circumstances where one is required by law to increase the elevation to FEMA levels, or where it's voluntary. But as Mr. Gilmartin pointed out, once you undertake to elevate the structure, the substantiality of the improvement would then bring it within the ambit of required FEMA compliance. So they don't really have an alternative. If they raise it at all, they must raise it to the FEMA level. I don't want to recite all of the testimony we've had, but I think there are some complicated questions. I'd like to hear more input from the other members. You want to start?
Why don't you start that way, since
You're the newest member,
I'm.
and you're the most reluctant member. John, you have anything?
Self-created hardship.
So,
Okay, under the law, self-created hardship is not determinative. It's to be taken into account. I will only comment on that to say that there has been a little bit of ambiguity as to what the self-created hardship is. It's been alleged that the FEMA regulation has made it a hardship and it's not self-created. On the other hand, the regulation isn't the hardship. The hardship is that someone has a house on the beach. The FEMA regulation merely governs how they protect it, but having built a house on the beach.
So we have no liability for further okaying someone who made a mistake in the first place?
The liability for not approving an increase in the elevation of a house that is an existing legal structure, I don't think that we
No,
have.
I don't see an issue of liability. You mean for the village or the board? If
Yeah.
you agree, no. Ultimately, no, I don't see that being.
Particularly since they could comply with the FEMA level and still be in compliance with the regulations, which has been a major subject of discussion here.
which is what I'm really interested in, because I feel like we had a few neighbors show up that all spoke at length and less length. There were some people on Zoom, I believe, at our first or second hearing that both spoke against the increased height. Nika's obviously spoke against more of the variance, but there were some people on Zoom on that meeting who
Saying
were
that it was gonna be inside.
were very, that were neighbors, that are neighbors. So I hear that, and again, as a person that is very familiar with the beach, I might not be an adjacent property owner, but I consider myself a stakeholder in the village of Sagaponic. And one of our most astonishing natural resources is our beachfront. And the way that we, as a zoning board, will end up really having a lot of input as to how our beachfront is continually developed. I think it's really important for us to distinguish what the height allowance really is. And then, of course, the pyramid laws, all those things, I think are actually a little bit easier to grasp because they're charted.
Right, but we take each variance and each application on its own terms.
We do. There's,
If all of the homes along the ocean front were to be raised to FEMA height, but still within our maximum height level in the code, clearly that would, though the entire neighborhood would change in character, it wouldn't change the character by reason of any one of the variances. But if all of the homes were raised to FEMA level and still exceeded the height restriction of the code, it would not only change the character of the neighborhood, it would change the character of the village.
that's what I'm saying.
Make it more like the Jersey Shore or something like
There, she's just asking for way too much. It's, I mean, there's just, and I don't believe those numbers that she came with. And I think that
You mean
she-
for the
for the construction.
For one of the feasible alternatives was
Yes.
suggested.
There
Seems extraordinary.
there's no way. There's absolutely no way, and I just don't believe them at all. And I feel like it could be relocated.
Can a septic system, there's a setback requirement for a septic system from a well. Is there a setback requirement for a septic system from a dwelling, major structure?
Yes.
Yeah, how 17 feet?
Your minimum is 10 feet from leach pools or the septic well itself. It'd be the same for the swimming pool, any structure.
So, John, just from your review of the existing plan, and I don't expect you to go and give us a definitive answer, is there any other feasible location for the septic system within?
I don't know, I've never seen a plot of the septic system.
Can't tell.
Where it sits.
Oh, wait, this isn't it. This, oh, yeah, this is it.
Is this part of the hearing? Is this evidence?
Wait, hang on a minute. Are you gonna object to my discussion with the building
Well, I'm just
inspector
asking
about
what
that?
it is, because it sounds like the hearing's still open.
No, the hearing's not open. Our deliberations are open, and one of our considerations is whether there is a feasible alternative. And there was testimony on the record that there was no other feasible location for a septic system.
You're taking testimony right now from the building.
Well, I'm not taking testimony. I'm asking a village, am I stepping out of bounds by doing that?
Maybe, I think it's best if we just keep to the.
On the board, sorry.
So
I want to ask
the
John.
the septic system is positioned.
Thank you.
It directly behind the house, but for the swimming pool. So septic,
I see where the septic is now.
oh, that's a sanitary.
Sanitary system.
Yeah,
There's
these are
also an
leaching pools,
existing
yeah.
cesspool. which
Well, you
is-
need that for the swimming.
Oh, for the pool.
Yeah,
okay.
you have to.
But this
This
system
would be for the
here,
house.
it is, I can't tell if it's within 10 feet of the structure, which is what the
More or less.
requirement is. It is probably, right? But, and where is the garage here? And this, is that, it's on this side. So if there were a, if the master bedroom were relocated over the garage or to the west, it would be far enough away from the septic system that it wouldn't require a relocation of the septic system.
But I think what we were, that goes back to the $2.6 million bedroom.
Okay.
So because what you were maintaining was that there were feasible alternatives this
Yeah,
way.
in the front
and-
yard
and
here,
what
in
Mr.
front of the
Dunn-
garage,
Yeah.
as opposed to over the
Right,
garage.
right. Although there's side yard, but yes.
No, well, there's plenty of side yard.
Unless they're
I mean,
using
they're,
all of these.
there's
no way.
Okay.
I think it's important to note too that, while we're trying to create the feasible alternative,
Yeah.
it's incumbent on the applicant too to really explore that, because it wasn't just that we limited to just that one.
Correct,
Yeah,
that's right.
we are.
So when it comes to the front yard,
But one of our standards for determining whether to grant the variance is whether there's a feasible alternative. The only feasible alternative that was explored by the applicant, notwithstanding my repeated suggestion that there were other alternatives, they didn't do it. And as to whether there really is another feasible alternative, I guess we're left to speculation.
Right.
So- Okay,
It's not 1 or 2 feet, it's quite, I mean. She's asking for a lot.
yeah, so that's the substantiality of the requested
Yeah,
variance.
and one of my problems with the whole thing, obviously the volumes are way off the charts that I've ever heard of. And whatever, sounds like whatever, you've heard of it previously, but that's the biggest issue is when it came back with an alternative, and I listened to each one of the sessions here. They came up with one alternative that was they just said was cost effective. It's got to be other alternatives, and again, that's not us to decide the alternatives, but there doesn't seem to be any suggestion whatsoever that they're looking into any other alternatives. So I have a little problem with that a little bit. And again, the size of this variance to me is I don't know what, I don't know if it holds any water, if there's, you take each variance separately and you analyze each one separately. As far as the property goes, but this doesn't seem to be much negotiation here at all. It is either, you accept this or not. And it's tough to accept something that's way off the charts and it's against everything we believe in on height variances, and everything seemed to be from looking from the beachfront. Well, you can actually look at it from the north side. That's really the visual imparity there. I mean, it's in the habit
I
as,
think we had those neighbors.
yeah, and that's why the neighbors came in, and I'm sympathetic to that in a big way.
By the way, there was another feasible alternative that was mentioned, and Mr. Gilmartin addressed it. We had suggested relocating it elsewhere within the existing footprint of the house. And he suggested that there were utilities and other building requirements that would have to be lifted with the house which gave limited area within the main floor level where perhaps the master bedroom could otherwise be relocated. But in the diagrams that we just saw, that were shown, to the extent that there were utility rooms or laundry rooms on that habitable level, they could be relocated much more inexpensively than $2.6 million to relocate a master bedroom, basically. If the master bedroom were relocated to where those utility rooms are. For example, I don't want that to be taken as required or exclusive, just another example of exploring whether the master bedroom could be placed where those utility rooms are, adjacent to that very large work area, that workroom, within the existing structure, a lot less expensively than $2.6 million, and still finding space for the utilities elsewhere, perhaps even on the uninhabitable level with adequate protection.
Also unclear, is what environmental impact is this to the beach? To me, I'm not satisfied that there isn't any. Are
Nor am
you?
I.
Are you? Yeah.
Not at all. But that's something that unfortunately, on the entire, any coastal area, there's very few places short of national parks that don't allow substantial improvement to their beachfront at a great cost to the community. I would.
It's gonna be so, it's gonna be so high. It's gonna be completely unsightly.
It's high now.
Well, it's also going to, we do have an adjacent neighbor who, we have two neighbors who have come to us with height variances right in the neighborhood, and we turned them both down. For a whole host of reasons, different reasons perhaps, but they were height variances.
What were they? I'm sorry.
So the
Well, we turned-
1101, which is the first house off of the parking lot.
At
It
11:45.
was 1145.
11:45.
And so that is a house that they wanted, similarly would like to raise, and I think that it would have brought it 11 feet.
I think that
They
was
wanted to
the-
raise it 11 feet.
No, they
It
wanted.
would be 11 feet above.
Yeah.
It would be, and so, or it would have brought the home has, it's not a flat roof structure, so it's got a lot of, I would call them cathedral-like pitches into the roof. So all of that, pretty much the entire, if you look at the house now, that entire house, that would all be, the entire pitched roofs would be above our height allowance on the beach. And then, of course, Nika's client said also. So,
Well, in
and
that
I don't know
case-
if there's been others, but Southampton never turns down height variances.
We have granted more modest height exceedances, like the one we just did tonight.
And the one at the base of
And
Gibson.
actually, the Petrello application, though it was rejected for other reasons, primarily the FAR, if I recall, the height variance, which was
Was
much more
granted,
modest, was
actually.
granted.
Yeah, yeah.
And what was the height variance there?
2 for 4 inches.
Yeah, so there, we have demonstrated some flexibility and willingness to cooperate on reasonable exceedances in order to allow FEMA compliance, but we rejected one that was comparable to this at the 11:45. So I don't want to bring this on internally either. I wanted to get some sense of the board and so that we could start moving towards a decision. I'm not going to call for a straw vote, but I think it's pretty clear what the sentiment is on the board. I think we should all read the minutes of the November meeting and this meeting when we get them, so that we can reconvene and then be prepared to move further to render an actual decision. If that's agreeable to everyone, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Or make that motion.
Yeah, make the motion. I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Thank you very much for adjourning. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.